The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. Thank you for tuning in today. We're here every day, 7 days a week at 3 p.m. Eastern. The whole goal is to keep you occupied and thinking about and growing in art. We started it at the beginning of the coronavirus quarantines, and we will continue it. So today we have a great video for you. It's called The Secrets of Classical Painting with Juliette Aristides.
So today is the second pass of paint. Yesterday we did the drawing and underpainting. Remember, we did a wash-in underpainting. You can also do a wipe-out underpainting, which is removing paint from the surface rather than adding it on. You could do a color wash. But here, because the pose in general is quite tonal, it makes a lot of sense to do a tonal underpainting. We did an overall opaque pass of color on the light parts of the figure. And today, even though we got a lot covered yesterday, today will require just a large investment of energy in getting the darks covered, some of the background, and resolving areas of form on our figure. So after not seeing it for a few hours, it gives us a fresh window of perception. So you can see it again with fresh eyes, and you only have a limited amount of time where you're able to see a painting and make corrections like that. Our eyes become acclimated as time goes on. It gets harder and harder to see mistakes. So I'm going to start by doing some big sort of global corrections, sort of adjustments more than outright big corrections, changes in emphasis and that sort of thing. So this is almost a extension of the drawing phase. So I'm going to come back and actually just use straight lines like I started with yesterday for our block in. So sort of re-block in our pose. So in the pose, the hair sort of alternates between being revealed from the neck and being revealing the neck or covering it up. And so I think I'm going to try to push it back. With paint, we have a fair amount of flexibility to change things and see what we think. The main thing to watch out for when you're doing multiple passes of paint is simply that you don't want to get this sort of cakey, thick paint layer. You want the paint to look fresh. And if the paint goes over too many times, you can end up with a thickness that you didn't intend. So back through here, we're really lacking a lot of definition, so now's the time to go back and get it. So I'm taking a more transparent red oxide, which is like a transparent sienna, and going back in and correcting some edge work, sort of pushing the darks through here, so I can begin to see exactly where this edge is going to be falling on the figure. I'm going to pull this in a little as well. I started off today with a more expanded palette. I've got a cadmium orange, and that will help me build up some brighter lights up through here. Got cadmium red as well, which we started bringing in for the drapery yesterday. So let's really start to pull up some identifying features of the back. Sometimes when you look at a painting, your painting, you get so discouraged if it's not where you wanted it to be. And I encourage you to try to tap into anger rather than sadness or discouragement. And actually, weirdly enough, rage, when well channeled into a painting, can give you the energy to make changes you might not normally, if you might be a little bit risk adverse. And especially if you put a lot of time into the painting, it can feel scary, like if you make a change, you could lose the whole thing. But if you're mad enough, you'll make that change and not care. And that sort of freedom from consequences, or freedom from worrying about what the consequences in the painting, can help actually make a better painting. So all these shadows right now are transparent. They're left over from the underpainting yesterday. So I'm going to take some burnt umber, and here's the same mixture that I had yesterday. It's a mixture of raw umber and rose gray, which is just my little bit of violet. I'm just going to knock in my shadow shape. Might warm it up a little. Okay, we're getting a lot of bouncing warms coming in from the drapery. So today is a perfect time to start to get that in once we knock the shadow in general. So this shadow shape is, I'm massing it in just like I did the lights yesterday. I'm not incredibly worried about if I'm getting, perfect color. I'm just getting it close enough and can reassess. This is a large portion of the canvas, or a large portion of the figure, and so getting it in is going to actually change quite a few things. It's going to expose weakness in through this area, requiring us to really repaint the halftone. Halftones are things that people who are not artists don't need to see it, and they actually don't see it. There's no reason to notice halftones. It takes training and time, even for artists, to be able to see these subtle gradations between the big shadow and the light. But the reason they're so important is because it's the thing that describes the curvature of our subject. How wide is this curve? Is it a a 90-degree curve like the edge of a table? Or is it a completely rounded curve like a sphere? All that is indicated by our, somewhat by the contour, but primarily by the degree of halftone. I'm going to take the Venetian red and put it in the reflected light area. Actually, this is a great spot to be able to look at reflected light, because it's a big shadow area, but it's receiving color as light is bouncing on the drapery. It's coming back up, into this back part of her body. An area where there's no reflected light would be in through the hair here, through that back part of the hair. This is exposing some weakness in the painting here, so I'll have to go back and repaint the drapery in through this part, the undercut of the figure. But for now, I'm going to do a placeholder and just push this edge, paint the edge of the figure one into another. Okay. Okay, so this is going to be a big area of decision. I think I'm going to move the spinal column over a little here. So this would be a big swelling. It feels like this shoulder can pull in. The overall width of it is okay. But the tip can be more rounded. If it's not dark enough, can drag a little bit of black in. So this area is trying to figure out what angle this is, and by just putting a vertical next to that edge, I can see that this is, on mine is a vertical, on Moon's back it tips in on a slight diagonal, and that's great for being able to start to correct tiny inaccuracies in direction. So maybe it's time to just mass in the shadow shape, but let's actually wait. We'll just push the back a little farther and then go ahead and tone this down. The spinal column we'll have to resolve. Right now I want this continuity from this line of the back to sort of hug and pull that scapula around. So this is sort of an ugly, harsh line, but just pushing, just want to refine where we're going with it. And this whole shape can hug in. So I'm going to grab some of these cool notes, these cool paints. You know, warm and cool, cool's references towards blue, and warm references towards yellow. So the more I drop this edge, the more it should wrap around, or indicate that that whole shoulder, that whole scapula is moving away from the light. So let's push down the, sort of paint that right into our background. So in this area, we might end up actually not ever really seeing how this resolves itself. So now we can wrap from this dark mid-tone over into the lighter section. So with art, it's interesting. You'll find painters that are drawn to similar things over and over again. If you look at the work of Vermeer, you'll see basically an entire body of work around figures and interiors, or you'll look at Chardin and drawn to simple still life setups and conveying a lot of profound appreciation for simple things. And with the painter Ang, you'll find him attempting one idea, and he'll do it 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 times, all playing against each other and all striving for something. And I'm not sure what that is about. I guess it's a sense of being called by something, and each time is an attempt to get closer to it. And you'll find as your career in painting progresses that even our best work only approaches but never actually hits what it is we're striving for. It's all just a gradual creeping towards something, and eventually that desire to absolutely say what you wanted to say in a painting. And maybe the day that we do achieve that, we'll feel done somehow. It's important to be able to vary where you're standing. Don't stand too close all the time, or it won't give you the opportunity to correct the work. So these small changes, which feel probably just overly time-consuming to watch if you're, as you're looking at this video, are really important. The whole painting, I guess just like life is just accumulation of 1,000 tiny decisions every day. A painting is rarely made up of, there's a few sort of critical big moments, but most paintings end up being just countless small decisions which eventually add up to a finished piece. And actually, if you're in the museum and you compare two painters, let's use Vermeer again, and often Vermeer's paintings are shown in rooms with other works by his contemporaries. And the works are really good. I mean, everybody, if you've made it this long through art history, and you're being exhibited, the work has value. But compared to the Vermeers, Vermeers just blast through or outshine, anyone from his time. And if you look at them next to each other, you can often find the subject matter is almost identical. And so if it's not the subject matter that makes a difference between one painting and the next, well, what is it? What makes his piece so great? And a lot of it is, is technically perfect, but just thousands of tiny, tiny decisions all through that differentiate, the Grand Master Vermeer and the merely excellent next painter. So this, we're going to wrap, grab a little green, olive green. And start to wrap that around. So I'm just going to mix up a little pure warm. So now the jump between this and that is a little big. Grab some of my orange, my earth ochre, and start wrapping this around. I'm going to just put the background in here so I could shift this edge. Some burnt umber with a little black. So this edge is so tricky. So I'm painting in the background so that I can begin to make a clear decision about what's happening with the edge along that side of our figure. Because it feels like there's just so many, there's just like a subtle angle change that's only going to be possible to get probably by carving it from this way in. When painting your backgrounds, try not to have all your brush strokes going the same direction. It just looks funny if they're painted like a, all one way or all the other. A good idea, if you're struggling with backgrounds, you're not sure quite what to do a master copy experiment with them where you're, you look through, get a file, find a digital, perhaps series of images online of paintings that you really like with just simple backgrounds that are beautiful and well handled, and start to notice what the painters are doing, and do a study of backgrounds. And you can often solve your background by looking at those for a while, and then you'll begin to get your own ideas about what works for your piece. That's a really helpful practice to begin to get comfortable with backgrounds. So my palette is always in a little bit of flux depending on what I'm painting, but I always set it up the same way in terms of the rhythm of it. Put white in the middle so I can easily mix my other colors with it. I'll have some range of yellows from light to dark. So here yesterday we had a Naples yellow. This is a brilliant yellow. Got cad orange, which I'm thinking I might end up using up in the lighter part of the skin. Always have a yellow ochre. So colors that I never fail to have would be yellow ochre, Venetian red, burnt umber, ivory black. Those are standard alizarin, and we can talk more later, and I can show you on a glass why I choose those colors. They're very historically, they've been used historically a long period of time, and they give you a really nice coverage of the color wheel. So burnt umber, raw umber, and this is my cad red. This is the Venetian, the alizarin. These are transparent red oxide, olive green and black. And sometimes I'll change this out for my ultramarine blue. Sometimes I'll add a stronger violet. Here, this is my black with white to give me a blue. This is my ochre with white, like we mixed up yesterday. And so sometimes it's helpful, especially if a lot of area to cover, to mix up a few midtones. And that you can do on your own, just taking your palette knife and sort of experimenting what would be a helpful color for the piece. Now I'm just gonna, since I'm starting on the background, I think I'm just gonna put it all in, well, not all, but just in through here. So I'll just put some in on the light side so we could keep that background going at a pretty similar rate. Just using a big brush. It's not a bad idea to use the biggest brush you're comfortable using for the space you're in, with the exception of really tiny form areas where you're really trying to carve out specific elements of the character. So here it's coming in. I want to step back just to double check. I think I'm going to push the amount of black on this side. Just to get that in. I have to give you a lot of credit. If you're still watching the video at this point, painting isn't much of a spectator sport. It's a wonderful thing to experience, but it can be hard to watch because it's so slow, or just develops so gradually. So thank you for hanging in there. Okay, so stand back and so I'm just grabbing more black, and maybe I'll grab a little bit of alizarin as well. Just dragging it over here as well, because black, it's funny, certain colors when they dry they get really matte and it's hard to tell what, they dry lighter, to be honest, and it can be a little confusing to and I'm going to do some edge work. It's all sort of uniformly soft. And it's not uniformly soft on her. Keep feeling like this should drag in a bit. Okay, so here the edge. The shoulder drags down, and there's this accent right through here. Let's get lower. This we can pull in. These measurement changes are really tiny. Bottom, I think, comes up higher. So that would be a drawing change affecting the drapery and the stool and stuff. So I'll get back to that later. I'm not going to correct it right now, just indicate it. So we can put angle in. Her leg, her knee and leg is tipped in a tiny bit more. So this, the highlight is really of the top plane, not so much highlight, but just sort of big plane angle towards the light. It's really pushed over farther, and so I want to inflate this part of the form while dropping all this down. So I'm going to push this over. This can be higher up. Okay, so this is the indentation of the greater trochanter through here. So I want to pull that forward, sort of surprisingly forward right through here. And that's just going to be a marker for me. But you can really see how much work we have to do. We have to get all this stuff covered today. So we can drop down. Okay, just like yesterday, I want to be careful about leaving edges exposed. So this is I want to just adjust some of these edges of the figure against the background. We don't want to leave sort of thick, nasty edges. Sort of go back and forth between how much of the edge we want to show. This might need to be stated more forcefully again later, you know, back and forth, but for now, we'll leave it. Okay. So for here, I can see some of this light pulling way down. So, I'm going to lighten this mixture. Keep this back arching. So here's going to be a swelling. This is going to be a series of swellings. So here, sort of an ovoid shape. And then here, another one. Okay. So I feel like I'm just remapping the area. I don't even feel like I'm at a point where I could begin to sculpt the form. Now, some people can do these really incredible, I don't know, they're just like machines. They could start in one area and you know, go to a complete finish. They can take this one area and make it just the most perfect form and never double back. I think my personality is just way too sort of conflicted or exploratory or something. I always have to map it out generally and sort of see where I'm going before I can go back and make a commitment to that one spot. So we're almost just going in and doing for the shadow areas right now what we did for the lights yesterday. Going to warm up this area of light that's by the spine up through here. You really push it over. Light is going to concentrate right by the vertebrae here and attach. So the lightest area of the back on this side, on the right side, is going to be right in through there. Okay. So we're grouping. We're going to group the lights. Continue to bunch it. Sort of find that trail. We're going to have to discover what's going on all through these. You know, every note represents a tip towards or away from the light. But even by now, you're able to see, I'm sure, how every stage of the painting is covering some part of the process that wasn't explored in the stage before. With alla prima painting or quick painting, there's really a lot that gets, you can leave it unfinished and things can be sort of even wildly wrong and not look bad at all. They sort of have a freshness, sort of a dazzling freshness that works its way through the piece. And that covers up a lot of, can cover up a lot of errors and not feel bad at all. The more a piece gets pushed towards realism, the less forgiving your audience is when they see things that are wrong. Things that are wrong look more incorrect than they do when a piece is just generally put in, because you can always say, well, you know, clearly it's unfinished. It's like, and so we sort of relax the expectations. But as we push the finish, we're setting a different kind of expectation that the piece will be resolved. So if the piece is resolved, then the one arm looks 16 times longer than the, you know, the other one. There's no mercy. And so that's why as you're pushing a piece to a finish, you can become a little bit harder on yourself as you're working. There's sort of a trade-off between freshness of execution and leniency of expectations. So this we're going to have to really drop down, or it'll push the viewer's eye towards that area. So edges become important because they're a means of governing our eye throughout the picture. A sharp edge will say, look at me. A soft edge will say, you know, I'm turning away, you know, go somewhere else. And it sets up the pace. A lost edge is a slow transition. A sharp edge is an accent point. And depending on how that's handled, often your soft edges will just allow one area to dissolve and slow the pace of the picture down. So let me rephrase that. There's a pace by which we view the work, and that rhythm of hard and soft edges sets this sort of the pace of how quickly you sort of drive through this track or look at the track of the painting. This is a big mess, so let's get going on that area. Whoops, where's my alizarin? This might need to cool down. So now I'm just sort of transitioning from one note to another all through here. Mix up a few violets. Turn that. So there was a historical rivalry between painters who like to have their images pushed to what they'd call a licked finished, where you could see no brush strokes, and those who favored showing sort of the hand that they were executed with in their final piece, where things were less resolved. One was in favor of, and they would say in favor of energy and emotion, and the other one in favor of the intellect. And there's sort of a judgment call or sort of a moral connotation about each side. But I think that there's been so many different art movements, and each art movement coming out of each time period has something so uniquely interesting about it, such a unique contribution, that it takes the sum total of all the different forms of art in a weird way to mirror back sort of the range of possibility in reality. There's no way one particular kind can say everything that there is to express, or else there'd be no more need for painters. And so I think it more comes down to which sort of work do you feel like best expresses what's in you. And certainly even for work that ends up being more loosely expressive, to be honest, the best people in history who did that had solid training in their background. They didn't start with it, they finished with it as their primary mode of expression, if you know what I mean. So I'm going to start back over here and push the cools. And let's see if I can start to get this area to turn a little. Whoops. So I'm still not happy with this area, but I can go back. I'll just leave it for a second so I can catch this up and then go back. Trying to get this value note dark enough so we can gradually push. So you can see this is quite a bit darker. That's okay. Here I'm strengthening the violets and maybe bring a little bit more umber into it. I might need to actually go and grab a stronger blue. Oops. So we're just turning up. This we're going to drop. So this part of the painting is all dealing with just these sort of murkiest of midtones. Feels funny, I'm sure, as you're painting these areas to be working so much with these sort of colors that feel so little like color. They feel more like these, just this sort of underworld of the color palette. And but they're absolutely essential for nuance, capturing some of the nuances of life. Yeah. Okay, let's take your break. Okay, so every time she comes up, I'm just going to take another look. This, now that she's sitting up there, it's because of a tiny cast shadow from her hair is over this edge, but I kind of like it, so I'm going to drop the value through there. And once again, I can always sharpen it later. So this form of edge work, it's really a type of direction, you know, sort of a director's role of figuring out where you want the viewer's eye to be. Okay, so I'm going to hop back down to where we were working after I soften this up. Switch to a bigger brush. So here there's this beautiful, cool passage, which I'm going to try to get in to find a decent color for it. Yeah, so you might find it odd to be continually working on areas and with colors that feel like they're not much of a color at all. But it's what gives a lot of life to the piece. And so it's funny, every aspect of art I found has some correlation with life. Just weirdly so, I suppose if we were chess players instead of painters, we would find something similar, that the movement of the pieces on the board, the value of the pieces and the strategy relate to life. But the same thing with painting, you know, everything from the, you know, at the beginning we were working from large angles to small, and that desire to see the big picture before zooming in on small issues. And at each point, there's a form of analogy. And I always used to wonder what the analogy was for halftones, because I couldn't figure out why we're spending so much time painting these dark, grimy sort of aspects of the subject, these areas that weren't quite colors, you know, or colors so neutralized they didn't feel like colors at all. But you need them in order to reveal the form. And then it sort of occurred to me that as unpleasant as it is that our characters are formed by dark circumstances, and that, you know, often we spend so much time, or I spend so much time, avoiding situations that hurt or avoiding situations that are uncomfortable. It's so painful to feel like that. But those are the very circumstances that end up sort of creating us. And so I think the parallel for me is that, see, as I'm pushing those dark, murky colors, the depth of the figure starts to be exposed, the character of the figure starts to be exposed. And so we leave those out really to our peril, you know, in the painting. So as much as you can, go ahead and live with the discomfort of developing areas of the painting you'd rather blast right on through. Now that being said, we want to be careful, because if we get our midtones up right into the lights, we can end up eroding the volume. So we want to be careful that at a certain point we really start getting lighter. Grab a little bit of our Venetian red. That's more than a little. Actually, if you do this, it's better to wipe it right off. This may not be the right color. It's not too bad, but too dark. A really good practice exercise for this is to turn the form in, simple objects like we recommend a sphere painting, or setting up a teapot or teacup, or an egg, or anything like that, where the pressures of the drawing aren't very significant. Sphere is just a circle, so that's very easy. And then see how round you can make it. Practice turning those halftones. So we're setting up these little tiles. So the ribs are going to be wrapping around. Here on the other side, we can lighten. Might end up having to lighten even more. Okay. We've got the highlight catching the ribs. This rib as it comes down. Here are these smaller ribs that don't wrap all the way across. We can start to get those in. Transitioning, and this, might not be pushed enough. I could end up going back and doing part of that again. But for right now, just taking care of the transition up through here. Let's blast some of the color. This will have to push up. We've got the scapula through here, and then the rib cage coming up behind it. Okay, so I'm going to drag. I'm getting some glare, so I'm going to adjust the brush strokes coming up this way. See if I can't see it a little better. So this got a little light too soon, so I could, I'm going to drop this value. Okay. So you can drop as it continues to climb up her back. And over. Can push that seam here, and then push the dark. This will. So I just want to really drop. Okay. So every brush stroke is just tipping it. Every time I add blue, I'm tipping it towards violet. Every time I add green, I'm pushing it more towards the orange, cooling that red aspect down. So. This will drop. So I'm going to end up sort of pumping up this, the lights, but first perhaps inflating right through there. Okay. I'm going to just mix with a palette knife. Sometimes when mixing with the brush, we can just get all these little brush strokes of color in unmixed color. So I'm just to start pulling up my lights. So this we can I think increase the orange a little bit more saturated. When we talked yesterday about pushing the brightness of a color through bumping up the chroma. So here we're going to really give it a good shock of color. Because the painting's so muted, any increase in color is a bump. I guess my most chromatic areas would still look fairly neutral on a piece, on somebody else's piece, if they were using a lot of phthalos or other intense pigments. I'm going to modify that edge in a minute because she's got so much better a shape up there than I do. Okay, this we can start wrapping around. This is considerably turned. And we want to start getting some distance between here and the undercut. I have to use a different brush to get in there. You could make a case that that's a little cooler in there, but for right now I'm going to settle for dark. Darker rather than cooler. Okay, so the light bunches here and then comes around through the back. And then through here we're getting our real swelling. Hopefully, I'm going to grab some alizarin. Thought I had it. Here we're going to bead up that light. So let it sort of hang on the brightest, on the part of the body that's most turned towards the light. This, I'm thinking I might need some more brighter color in through there as well. Okay. This we can continue. We're almost sculpting it. So here we can begin to taper that light off. Got some areas of transition that are missed. So I want to get a pretty decent band of value running across. This we can perhaps, this is sort of an interesting point here. It is a hugely common mistake to go dark in an area that's really flooded towards the light. So just be careful in areas like this. If we could, if it can be a color change rather than a value change, we're sort of better off for it. So it's an economy, it's a form of economy. So in this area, we're going to opt for a value, a color rather than a value change. So bunch up the light through here. And then I want to shape before, this is what we were talking about earlier when we get a slight movement in the pose, but it ends up being towards our advantage. So there's just a little bit of an emphasis across here that I'm seeing now that I wasn't before. And so I want to grab it in case it doesn't come back. So movement can be our friend, not just, an adversary. Just quickly lighten this. Okay.
The classical figure painting technique was almost lost forever when the artistic community began to embrace more abstract forms of expression. But today, thanks to the classical atelier movement, we are experiencing a rebirth of one of the most powerful painting techniques that the world has ever known. Classical figure painting strikes a profound balance between elegance and emotional impact, giving you the ability to create a realistic composition that is full of both life and of feeling. Streamline Art Video Productions is proud to give you a chance to learn how to paint in the classical style from one of the most in-demand modern teachers of the technique. Follow along as Juliette Aristides takes you on a journey from the very first steps of posing your subject to adding the details that will bring your painting to life.
So can you arch your back other way? Yeah, round the back a little bit. And can you slightly turn your head towards that back wall?
In this all-new video, you'll receive profound insights into both the theory and application of this timeless painting method.
So with this pass, I can actually get a little bit of modulation of the surface. So I'm going to go ahead and try to find where some of that shine is on the hair.
Juliette will show you step by step how to create a beautiful lifelike figure painting in the classical style. She'll reveal how to develop the unique eye of a classical painter, how to draw the charcoal on your canvas to establish proportion, and the exact color palette, brushes, and tools she uses. You'll also discover the classical technique to expressing the muscles of the back, shoulders, arms, and other parts of the anatomy that make up the human form. You'll learn how to express yourself through a new lens of stunning realism using the classical technique, and so much more.
I'm going to take the Venetian red and put it in the reflected light area. Actually, this is a great spot to be able to look at reflected light because it's a big shadow area, but it's receiving color as light is bouncing on the drapery. It's coming back up.
This exclusive 8-hour video training gives you the tools you need to create a beautiful figure painting that captures the pure and essential sense of humanity within your own personal vision, even if you're a complete beginner. Secrets of Classical Painting with Juliette Aristides is now available on DVD and digital download from Streamline Art Video Productions. Secrets of Classical Painting with Juliette Aristides.
What a fabulous video. That's Juliette Aristides and the Secrets of Classical painting. And you can learn more about the full-length course at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, there's a special discount on that course today only. You can find it in the comments section. Now let's get right to our interview to get to know Juliette. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, and today we're with Juliette Aristides, and we're going to find out a little bit about what makes her a great artist and what makes her tick. So welcome.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
I'm kind of curious. I like to kind of go back to the root of things and start out at the beginning of life. I understand that as a young child, you and your family immigrated to the United States. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, we immigrated when I was small. We had a big family in Cape Town, and my parents wanted to leave for a couple reasons. You'll notice when you travel, there's a lot of South Africans everywhere you go. Part of that is they like to travel. My parents thought that when their kids got big, we would end up leaving them and to go somewhere else. So part of it was preempting to move here. And then the other thing was the apartheid. They didn't want to live in an apartheid nation. So we immigrated in the 70s.
And you were what age?
3.
So tell me about your first thoughts about art, sketching. You have any?
Not so much. Being a painter was something that there was never a moment where I decided I'm going to be an artist when I grow up. It was something that I slid into gradually without any cataclysmic event or moment that caused that to happen. And so there's never been any plan B.
So in terms of defining moments, was there a painting, an artist, something that really spoke to you and said, this is what I want to do for a living?
No, and actually I didn't care if I could do it for a living or not in terms of the living part. The financial aspect of it didn't make any impression on my mind growing up whatsoever. I guess it was more of a compulsion. And you know, it's interesting, Robert Louis Stevenson wrote an essay, Advice to a Young Gentleman Considering a Career in the Arts, where a fellow said, well, how do I know if I'm going to be a painter or not, or if I should be? And he said, you have to watch out when you're trying to make that choice when you're younger, because he said sometimes you can confuse wanting to be an artist with actually just not wanting to work. You know, and young people just love experiences of all kinds. He said you can tell if you're going to be an artist, whether that is being a writer like he was, or you know, poet, painter, draftsman, any of those things. If you have an infinite love of learning difficult things that are uninteresting to anyone else, and if you put just an inordinate amount of weight on things that have sort of no consequence. So for example, how light hits a particular area of form, you know, or which painter used a particular kind of palette. You know, nobody's life hangs in the balance on that one. But if you talk to a painter who's sort of a born painter, for reasons that no one or we can't explain, it matters. It matters a lot.
So Stevenson obviously spent a lot of time with artists. I think John Singer Sargent did 3 portraits of him. I have a friend that owns one of them.
Wow, lucky.
And you can really see the passion that Sargent had for him in that painting. It's one of the most beautiful paintings I've ever seen.
It is remarkable. I found that the temperament of writers and painters, it's the same. It's really the same impulse. It's just channeled a different direction. But the desire to help people see. You find when writers write about why they do it, and not just one, but almost, I think, everyone I've ever read, it's a desire to get people to stop and to pay attention, and almost perhaps share in the delight that they've felt in looking at it. I mean, perhaps, never really thought about it, but perhaps they have a secret love, and you know, a love with what they're experiencing, and the writing or the painting is a way to say, hey, check it out.
Is that what drives you? Is it you want other people to look at the objects or the pieces differently, to see things differently?
You know, perhaps it's a form of communion in that way. Have you read Tolstoy? He wrote a book on art, and he said that he tried to explain why, do you try to do it to capture the beauty of painting? What is it? And for him, it was, he had such a weird word, infecting of emotion, like the actual transference of an emotion. So for him, it was just a desire perhaps to communicate, and that is such a foundational aspect, to not be alone. And if you think of it with painting, it's perhaps one of the most deepest forms of communication, because it's there's no words involved. You're literally seeing through a painter's eyes. And if the painter is a very, very good one, it is an emotional experience, and it creates a sort of collapse of time. So you look at it and you feel. And I guess that's the same for books as well. And you've got a kind of friend in them. And so painting, I'd say, does share that, or my experience.
Yeah, you become consumed. I have had experiences where I've gone into art museums and been absolutely exhausted coming out, and not understanding why, but because I've become so emotionally consumed. Sometimes you get around so much of that, it has a huge impact on you. Yeah,
it does, and it's interesting because, painting in the tradition that we're interested in, which is representation of the real world, it's funny because we're in a strange time in history where I feel like, well, not just feel, the real is being eroded. And in fact, because we spend so much time online, through sort of one step removed from a direct encounter with real life. So if you go to a museum, it's this absolute sort of hitting over the head affirmation of real life, the physicality of it. And I think when a great painting touches me, I go back out into the world from that experience, able to see things that I didn't see when I went in.
Well, the state of things today is pretty interesting. I was just in Amsterdam and attended a lecture. And the lecturer said, she showed images of a popular photographer in Amsterdam who was creating photographs that were similar to the still lifes of the old masters, with the dramatic lighting. And she said that those photographs were selling more than an actual old master painting.
Oh, interesting.
It's really an interesting, and she said it, and not only are they're photographs, but they're just digital prints of photographs, and that the younger generation is embracing them and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on these photographs when they could, for a fraction of that price, get an actual old master painting.
Yeah, it's interesting because they don't know the difference. If you grow up not knowing, then how can you tell? So there is an element of visual literacy involved, and pace too. There's, with the painting, there's the technical excellence of it, but also, there's an element, it has to be decoded in a way that perhaps some real life or photography or, video doesn't.
You're kind of at the lead, or certainly one of the leaders of this representational art movement in America, which is very encouraging and also very discouraging. Encouraging in the sense that when we started Fine Art Connoisseur, for instance, there were very few ateliers to be found anywhere in the country, and it was unusual to find very many young people who were interested in studying and learning these generational techniques that have been passed down from generation to generation and almost lost since 1913, when modernism kind of hit America. And yet discouraging because we watch Rauschenberg go for $185 million at Sotheby's, and we don't see what we're doing necessarily being embraced by the art world, if you will, and the big dollars. There's a debate going on about this whole representational movement, and is it a return to the past, which some people think, or is it a radical new young person's movement? What are your thoughts?
We're in an age of information, and also, you could say, an age of distraction. We have so many different things pulling on us all at once, and it's tempting to say that the time that we're living in has sort of created a sort of frenetic pace that is incompatible with the traditional, art. And traditional art, I mean, painting what's around us, painting nature. So not only are we just in our personal lives disengaged from nature, we're spending less time outside. I mean, kids are spending less time outside. And also we have less time for thought. To have one long, uninterrupted thought, and that's what it takes to develop anything of depth, is quiet time and, fumbling around a little bit, following leads, letting them die. That takes time. We can't do that when we're constantly being needled. So it's tempting to think that our age sort of created that frenetic way of relating to life, and certainly it's intensified it. And along with that, we've got all sorts of like sociological sort of deep malfunctions that are happening as a result. We consume 90% of the world's opiate pharmaceuticals. We are hugely medicated as a culture. We could hit statistic after statistic in terms of the human cost of a culture that we're creating. However, our times didn't create that. If you go back to the year 5, for example, there's still texts being written on, be careful, if you're distracted, you're going to miss your life. I mean, they really flat out say it. You read Seneca or whoever, they're very clear about the fact that if we're busy and we're not paying attention, we're going to miss what most makes us human. And so I think what we're experiencing now is an aggravation of what's there to begin with. And so I think in one sense, if you think that human depth of thought, deep connection to the environment we're living with, the desire to matter, to create something that will outlast the time in which we're living, that will speak to people that come after us, all that sense of permanence, all that is part of us as much as anything else. Now, when you look at traditional painting, it almost becomes a question of, is that part of our human nature going to die out? I don't believe it. I think part of being human is all those things. And so I think that traditional drawing and painting is sort of a human movement that will never disappear as long as there are human beings to experience it, as long as we don't lose that part of our nature. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Well, the pendulum always swings the opposite direction eventually. And with all the high-speed life that's going on and the chase for staying busy and staying preoccupied and looking at our phones at every moment, at some point that all crashes and burns, I believe. And that is, I think, the point at which we see things coinciding with the young people today, yourself and the people that you've been teaching and the people that their students are now, they now have students, that those people 10, 15, 20, 25 years from today will be considered the great masters of our time. And I think that the art pendulum swings. Historically, the pendulum has always gone back and forth about every 80 years. And society always swings back and forth every 80 to 100 years, if you follow the book Generations by Strauss and Howe. And so what I think will happen is that these things will be icons of peace and icons of relaxation and icons of depth when people start realizing that they've completely trashed their lives by spending every minute stimulated rather than not allowing themselves to be stimulated so that they can use their brains.
Yeah, you've just come right out and said it, and it's absolutely true. I mean, people can debate the point, but deep inside, it's, regardless of whether this art movement is ever sort of lauded by a larger, culture, it doesn't even matter to me. If art, art's supposed to needle a little bit. It's supposed to be countercultural. Art, what we're doing stands outside the culture as a whole, so we're able to speak into it in a way that others might not be able to. And so I think the fact that there's a little bit of disjoint between sort of big commercial art and what we're doing, I think that it's always been a little bit unique, in the whole industrialized era since 19th century even, that idea of pouring an enormous amount of time into something that's handmade and quirky and imperfect. So, you know, I think, to me, yes, it will be accepted in bigger ways, perhaps. You know, it will come back and fade. It won't disappear, you know.
Well, one hopes not. And quite frankly, I keep telling young artists, be careful what you wish for. Because they're saying, you know, gee, why am I not getting the kind of levels of money that we're getting for, you know, some of the modern abstract artists out there today. And I say be careful what you wish for, because if you become part of that machine, it changes everything.
Absolutely.
It changes the nature and the soul of painting. And suddenly it becomes like Warhol, a production factory.
Absolutely.
And like Koons and others, it's a matter of producing product that people want to own and consume and pay large prices for, and that's going to impact the nature and quality of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you can be a wonderful artist and not equate that with a dollar sign. You know, John Sloan, I'm not, you know, Ashcan School, not enormously enamored with it, but he had this great line. He said, I'm a success as an artist, but I'm a failure as a rent payer. So he did not equate financial success with success in the arts, and we're absolutely wrong to start connecting that back up again. I think we stand outside the culture, we're proud of what we do, but we don't buy into that sense that because we've got a particular affluence of lifestyle, that somehow that equates us with any kind of importance whatsoever. And you're right, it could actually erode the thing that makes us different.
Well, there's a purity, and a purity that can be lost with the financial aspects of it. The purity of someone who is painted completely from their soul, from their heart, versus the purity, or the loss of purity because of, you know, the temptation of, well, you know, the gallery wants some more of those little red barns because they sell so well. And you know, you wonder, what does that do to you on the inside? You know, part of you says, well, you know, I need the money, I need to succeed. And by the way, I teach artists how to market, so I'm a little bit guilty of this too. But I think that, you know, essentially we have to do what we love. You know, if the galleries like what we love, and if they don't like what we love, we still have to do what we love.
You know, we have to think of what we have to offer the world. What we have to offer the world is not, you know, necessarily our personal, you know, comfort, or how you know, what model of car we drive. I mean, that's such an obvious thing, but we have real medicine for a time that needs it. We can't forget that. And so when we take our skill set and we begin to say, well, you know, if I do a painting of a nude and it's bottoms up and all whatever, you start to see this in the realist movement, where the subject is really pandering towards a modernist aesthetic and sort of mirroring the meaninglessness of the culture for the sake of somehow fitting in. And in that moment, we lose, well, let's put it this way, we miss our opportunity to share what is most meaningful about what we have to give, you know, I'm saying.
Well, you know, I'm of the sense that this is a radical movement. You know, if you go back to the days of Impressionism, when Bouguereau was running the School of Beaux-Arts in Paris, and the Impressionists were essentially rebelling against, you know, you have to paint this way, you have to paint in this style, and then things went completely the opposite direction, and as far as it could possibly go. And so much so that now these young people who are doing what you do and that you're teaching to do what they do, the art world, the big art world, the moneyed art world looks at this as totally radical, and not necessarily radical in a good way. But you know, I think that 20-year-olds always kind of signal what's coming. And the fact that there are probably 2,500 or 3,000 20-year-olds who are studying in ateliers around the world today, and they weren't there 14 years ago when we started this magazine. There were 20 of them or 30 of them or 40 of them, not thousands of them. And Warhol said, if you get 100 young 20-year-olds going in a different direction in art, the art world will move in that direction.
Yep.
So what's being done is radical, and 20-year-olds want to do the opposite of what their parents and grandparents wanted to do, and their parents and grandparents embraced modernism. And I'm not here to trash modernism. I'm just saying that I think that your time has come. It's not here yet. Well, let's talk about technique for a minute. Obviously, that's what you do. You teach technique, but you teach more than technique, I suspect. I've not attended any of your lectures or have not been to your school, but it's very clear in knowing you that technique is critically important, but it's not the whole picture.
No, it's not. The technical aspect is, it's essential, because through studying we learn discipline, we learn how to wake up and go to work every day, and the skill set that you need to become an artist is actually tied more towards that discipline of waking up and working through a difficult problem when you've worked for a month on this painting and you've reached this sort of crisis moment. The skill set to deal with that kind of discouragement is a thing that will keep an artist painting 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So it's when this sort of subtle passion or love that someone has gets forged into a lifelong endeavor. So that's the one aspect of it. Another is gaining the history, because when we're studying the history of the craft, we're aligning ourselves with centuries of knowledge, and the sophistication of what people were doing in the past. It's like, you just can't get over it. You think, okay, somehow if I study this subject as hard as I can, the mystery will be gone. I'll go into a museum, look at a painting by Veronese or whoever, and I'll see through the behind the scenes. I'll see how the curtains are maneuvered, and it will lose the joy. But it's exact opposite. The more you know, the more you look at these paintings and are utterly flabbergasted at how they pull it off. So one is just sort of discipline. Another is becoming part of this great historical dialogue and not reinventing knowledge, but grafting knowledge. And then the other aspect is, content. What am I saying? How can I say it better? The other one is community, being part of a community of people who are working at the same thing. So I think of it mostly in those 4 ways.
Do you follow obviously what's going on in the world today from a lot of the realists throughout America and through other places in the world? Do you see painters today that equal the quality of some of the masters of the past?
It's tough, and I'll tell you why. I think skill-wise, where we are right now compared to a generation ago, there's no contest. There's more people able to paint better, easier. There's not the awkwardness we saw, a generation or 2 ago when so much of the knowledge base has been lost. However, that being said, unless you're thinking about things, unless you're wrestling with subject matter is important. I think when we start getting big commissions and when artists start doing paintings, not saying, okay, I've got a one-person show coming up and I hope to, sell 14 of these paintings, and I know if I do X, Y, and Z, I'll be featured in the next magazine or whatever. When artists start looking at comparing themselves in that slightly different way, then we'll match our excellent skill set with a great message, and then all of a sudden our work will be a continuation of that high point of history.
I think that's a very good point, because first off, I think there's an anxiousness to be accepted, an anxiousness to be financially successful, And though, again, I teach artists how to market, one of the very first things that I talk to them about is you've got to be ready. And it takes time to be ready. And most people are not ready when they think they're ready. Talk to me a little bit about the process. There are people who are watching this video who have not had the opportunity to go to an atelier, who maybe have not even been able to go to a workshop of someone like yourself or Jacob Collins or Daniel Graves or others. What do you think are the important aspects that people need to go through to learn this process and the disciplines that come with it? Can you talk about your process and what you think is important for students to learn in the order that they learn them in?
Yeah, the atelier movement, for people who aren't sure of what that is basically studio schools, independent studio schools, where it's not broken down into individual classes. So if you go to a university program, you might take, Thursdays from 6 to 9, you would take figure drawing, or perhaps there's no more figure drawing in many programs, but design or whatever it is. With an atelier program, you are learning under an individual artist, and you have a lot of hours. You'll study for years. And so the way that I trained and the way that I train others is to break up that complex act of painting into composite parts. So you'd spend a year on drawing, and then you'd spend a period of time on grisaille painting or tonal painting, and then move into full color. And in that time, you'd also study anatomy and other things. And so what I would encourage people to do if they're at home is to practice. I think it's just too easy to get discouraged if you go straight to the end result at full-blown portraiture in full color without ever having the baby steps that most professional artists all professional artists go through to be able to get the technical skill to where they are. So for example, if, often when you see these demos, or I'll see a demo of someone, and it's just mind-blowing. It's like watching one of those slow motion nature videos where they have, they're watching a flower like open, and you can say, well, how do they do that? Well, you just watched it. Can't you tell me how that flower just opened? And so with painting, someone can actually watch from beginning to end and never quite lock in on how it's happening. And that part that's missing is all the hours the artist spent, doing the skills. So for example, if we go watch a figure skater go out and do a triple axel or something, just because we watch them do it, well, how did they get so good? They'll learn how to skate, and then they'd learn how to do small things. And so what I'd encourage people to do is don't assume you don't have an aptitude for it, or that you won't even be exceptional if the first couple steps out the gate you fall flat on your face. Everybody does that. They're just not showing you. They're just not telling you about it. So go and learn how to draw. Build up your drawing skills, and then take these little projects, these side projects. So my new book is Lessons in Classical Painting. There's a series of very discrete exercises. Practice those till they're your friend, and then you'll find the one skill will build, the knife skill. So we'll end up going into, you can chop your onion, now you have your base for your soup, that sort of thing.
Well, I think that's really an important element, because we're in a society of instant gratification, and we give our kids awards for losing.
I do it anyway.
And I tell people, anybody can learn to paint.
Yep.
They think that there has to be a artistic skill. And I do think artistic skill enters into things at some point, but I believe that anybody can learn to paint. I have always told people, if you can learn to cook, you can learn to type, you can learn to paint, and you can learn to draw, because really it's a technical process. And if you just will stick to it and have the patience, you can get there.
Absolutely. That's true. It's absolutely true. It's interesting because there's at one time everyone could write. Like if you look at early American drawing manuals, it's fascinating. They'll have calligraphy and you're learning penmanship, which is an accomplishment, and everyone's is a little different. It's no uniformity. Go from that to geometry. So you'll find the same book, calligraphy, going to circles and triangles, and then basic geometry, perspective and drawing. So, and it would be a primer for, secondary school kids. And there was a sense of course, you're going to beautifully write, and of course, you're going to be able to draw at a certain level. We can all learn to play a little bit on the piano. It has nothing to do with whether we're going to end up being a great composer, a great pianist. Nothing to do with it at all. And in fact, the best work isn't always the paintings that I love the most aren't always ones that are going to win any awards for being, the most gigantic, ambitious paintings ever. They're quirky and they're authentic and they're interesting. And so it's more about finding that match between who I am and the painting I end up with. When I look at that painting, do I see me in it? And that's, you need competent skills so you're not making huge errors. You don't need to be Michelangelo, and nor should you be, because he's not the only painter that ever lived. The world is big, and
well, and it's about it's got to start with about painting for yourself.
Yeah,
I believe. I think the minute you're painting for others, it changes the nature of things.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And so I think anyone who learns how to paint, it just increases your pleasure of life. There's no downside to it. It's all an affirmation. It really is.
Well, as a painter, I can tell you that my eyes have been opened to light and shapes and clouds and colors, driving down the road, almost driving off the road because I'm staring off at some shape of the clouds and the colors in the clouds, and nobody else in the car notices them because they're just, to them, that's just the day.
That's when life really happens.
Yeah.
That's real life. If we could live in that all the time, it would be the richest, longest, best life of all. I think those are our high points.
Well, I think that in a sense, being an artist is like having enriched senses.
It is.
It's probably the same if you're a gourmet cook. You have enriched senses. You're really able to put things together and taste them, or being a vintner. But as an artist, seeing things in a different way. And the next closest thing to that is experiencing an artist by going to a museum or to a show and being able to just slow down and stop and look and let those senses kind of engulf you.
Yeah, it absolutely is. You hit it exactly correctly. It's an enlargement. It's almost like superpowers, like a superhuman superpower, that all of a sudden you're noticing things. You walk just right by, and that experience of deep communion with the people we're with and the things we're seeing. Ruskin, the great drawing instructor, said he'd rather teach people to love drawing so that they can then appreciate nature than to learn to draw for its own sake. And so we'll end up with beautiful drawings or paintings perhaps if we keep at it long enough, but what no one can take away from us is our deep love of life.
When all is said and done, hopefully you've got a lot of time left, but when all that time is gone, what do you hope people will remember you for? Or do you care?
It's interesting. Maybe I do the books for these reasons, because I've spent so long studying. I want to leave a gift of, I took the long road off trail, and really want to share that. I don't want that to be lost. And when I started studying, there was no guarantee that this tradition would continue. Now I'm encouraged that it will. I don't know how I want to be remembered. If I could help people stop and look and more deeply engage in the life that they're living, that's all I've ever tried to do with my life. And personally, if I'm able to express that or have that translate, perhaps that's my art.
Well, there's a lot of people don't understand what occurred, and you're to be applauded, you and a handful of others. There were some people who managed to keep these techniques alive that had been passed from generation to generation for 500, 600, 700 years. And we almost lost all of those people.
Yeah, we did.
At the beginning of the modernist movement. And very few hung in there, continued to teach, could never sell a painting to save their life, struggled, did not succumb to the temptation of going the other direction. Very few of them managed to carry that forward. And really, you're part of the next generation, which is now, and I don't want to use the word senior because you're not a senior.
No, it is.
But
100%.
you started at a very young age, and now you and Jacob Collins and Graydon Parrish, Daniel Graves, you really are the people who have carried this movement to the next generation. And now it's really interesting to watch as the students that you've had are now starting their own studio schools.
It's amazing. It's really weird.
And it's like a blossoming, a flower. You know, it's like watching popcorn grow in a can. You know,
I can't keep track of it. Yeah, at the beginning, for the first, I don't know, it felt like for the first, decade and a half, I knew everybody. There were no surprises, and now I can't keep track of not only individuals who are painting and painting so well, but schools and institutions. It's a gift to be able to watch it.
And it must be very gratifying, and we all owe you a giant thanks, not only for your time today, but a giant thanks for devoting your life to teaching and to helping others find beauty and to helping these young people learn the techniques. And you worked very hard and struggled and went through all of that study and frustration to get to learning what you learned so that you could carry it forward. And I hope that the people watching this will take that on for themselves and will carry it forward too.
Thanks so much, Eric, and certainly you've had a huge part in this as well. Your accomplishments are just extensive, and so thanks so much for having me.
We're honored. Well, that is Juliette Aristides, and her video, of course, is called Secrets of Classical Painting. You can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, today only, there's a special discount. You can find the discount code in the comments section. I want to remind you that we have a free video. It's 2 hours long, over $100 in value. It's called 97 Amazing Painting Secrets from the World's Best Artist. It's yours for free. Just go to 97tips.com. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm Eric Rhodes.
The classical figure painting technique was almost lost forever when the artistic community began to embrace more abstract forms of expression. But today, thanks to the classical atelier movement, we are experiencing a rebirth of one of the most powerful painting techniques that the world has ever known. Classical figure painting strikes a profound balance between elegance and emotional impact, giving you the ability to create a realistic composition that is full of both life and of feeling. Streamline Art Video Productions is proud to give you a chance to learn how to paint in the classical style from one of the most in-demand modern teachers of the technique. Follow along as Juliette Aristides takes you on a journey from the very first steps of posing your subject to adding the details that will bring your painting to life.
So can you arch your back other way? Yeah, round the back a little bit. And can you slightly turn your head towards that back wall?
In this all-new video, you'll receive profound insights into both the theory and application of this timeless painting method.
So with this pass, I can actually get a little bit of modulation of the surface. So I'm going to go ahead and try to find where some of that shine is on the hair.
Juliette will show you step by step how to create a beautiful lifelike figure painting in the classical style. She'll reveal how to develop the unique eye of a classical painter, how to draw the charcoal on your canvas to establish proportion, and the exact color palette, brushes, and tools she uses. You'll also discover the classical technique to expressing the muscles of the back, shoulders, arms, and other parts of the anatomy that make up the human form. You'll learn how to express yourself through a new lens of stunning realism using the classical technique, and so much more.
I'm going to take the Venetian red and put it in the reflected light area. Actually, this is a great spot to be able to look at reflected light because it's a big shadow area, but it's receiving color as light is bouncing on the drapery. It's coming back up.
This exclusive 8-hour video training gives you the tools you need to create a beautiful figure painting that captures the pure and essential sense of humanity within your own personal vision, even if you're a complete beginner. Secrets of Classical Painting with Juliette Aristides is now available on DVD and digital download from Streamline Art Video Productions. Secrets of Classical Painting with Juliette Aristides.